Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are digging into a pretty startling forecast that points to a major shift in the U.S. housing market. It actually identifies 22 specific cities where that pandemic-era housing boom isn't just cooling off, it's starting to go into reverse.
Okay, so let's jump right in. This quote really gets to the heart of it. We're not talking about some fringe theory here. This is all based on a quietly published list from, one of the biggest names in real estate, and it suggests there's a huge story unfolding that is just flying completely under the radar. And here it is. This is that list, or at least the top of it. And look, this is data, not drama. Realtor.com has put out official projections showing actual price declines for this year. We're not talking about growth slowing down. No, we're talking about a 10.2% drop in Cape Coral, Florida, almost 9% in Northport, Sarasota. And this is just a snapshot. The full list has 22 major metros on it.
But here's what's so fascinating. The list itself, it isn't the real story. It's just the latest, most obvious symptom of a much bigger and, honestly, predictable pattern. A cycle that has been repeating with almost machine-like precision for more than 100 years.
So what is this pattern? It's called the 18-year real estate cycle. Now, if that sounds familiar, it should. This is the exact framework that economist Fred Harrison used to correctly predict the 2008 financial crisis, and he did it more than a decade before it actually happened. If you want to understand what's going on right now, you have to understand this cycle. So here's how it works. The cycle always, and I mean always, unfolds in these four distinct stages, and it's always in this order. It kicks off with a healthy foundation phase, right after a crash. Then you get the expansion, where growth really starts to pick up steam. That leads directly into the mania phase. This is where prices totally disconnect from reality. And it always ends with the correction, which basically hits the reset button so the whole thing can start over again. Now, to really get a handle on where we are today, we've got to look back. Because this isn't just some abstract model, it's a historical fact. This exact four-stage pattern has literally been the blueprint for every single major real estate bubble and bust in modern history. I mean, think about it. The legendary Florida land bubble of the Roaring '20s? It followed this pattern to a T. How about Japan's epic collapse that led to their lost decades? Same exact pattern. And of course, the 2008 crisis, which so many of us remember, it followed this playbook precisely.
And this slide just lays it all out, side by side. Look at the mania stage that came before the 2008 crash, and then look at the one we just lived through. The core ingredients are identical. Prices completely unhinged from what people actually earn, buying driven by pure FOMO, that fear of missing out, and that dangerous belief that real estate only goes up. The only thing that really changed was the fuel poured on the fire. Back then it was subprime lending. This time it was a crazy mix of pandemic migration and sub-3% interest rates.
So let's bring this right up to today. The cycle we're in now got supercharged by everything that happened in 2020. That massive shift to remote work, combined with basically free money from the Fed, it took us from a normal expansion phase to a full-blown mania phase at warp speed. And that created the worst affordability crisis we've seen in at least 40 years. And this chart, wow, this right here shows you the huge mathematical gap. Since 2019, home prices in the U.S. shot up by 53%. But in that same time, what people actually earn, their incomes, only went up by 24%. Prices have risen more than twice as fast as the paychecks needed to afford them. That is the entire story in just two numbers.
And what's the result of that huge disconnect? Well, it's this number. The share of first-time buyers in the market has just collapsed to 21%. That is the lowest level ever recorded since they started tracking this stuff back in 1981. An entire generation that should be building wealth is getting locked out, and it's pushed the average age of a first-time buyer to a record high of 40.
Okay, so all of this is leading to one single, unavoidable conclusion. Stage 4, the correction. It's not a prediction. It's not something that might happen down the road. The data makes it clear it's already happening, especially in the markets that got the most overheated.
Let's take Raleigh, North Carolina, for example. One of the poster children for the pandemic boom, right? Well, the number of homes for sale there has skyrocketed by over 54% in just 1 year. This tells you that the lock-in effect, where homeowners with those super low mortgage rates wouldn't sell, well, that's starting to crack. Supply is coming back.
And what happens when you get more supply hitting a market where buyers are already stretched to their absolute financial limit? You get this. Across the entire country, almost 35% of all houses on the market have had a price cut. That is a direct signal that the power is shifting away from sellers, and fast.
And down in Florida, it's more than just a simple correction. It's a perfect storm. I mean, not only are prices already way down from their peaks in places like Cape Coral and Northport, but homeowners are getting hammered by soaring property insurance costs. On top of that, there's a whole separate crisis in the condo market, where new safety laws are causing HOA fees to explode, making some of these units almost impossible to sell.
Okay, so that brings us to the most important question. How in the world do you navigate what Redfin is now calling the Great Housing Reset? Let's try to cut through all the noise, look at the common arguments you're probably hearing, and map out a clear, data-driven path forward. It is so important to separate the popular stories from the hard data, right? You'll hear people say, oh, lending is stricter than in 2008, and that's true, but it completely ignores that affordability is the worst it's been in 40 years. People talk about a national housing shortage, but that hides the fact that there's a glut of supply in the exact Sunbelt markets that are now correcting. And the whole idea that a small drop in interest rates will save the day, it just doesn't stand up to the math of that massive price-to-income gap.
So here's what you can actually do. If you own a home in one of those 22 cities, it's time to get brutally honest about your local data. If you're hoping to buy, your focus has to shift from trying to time the market to just finding a monthly payment you can actually live with for the long haul. And for everybody, keep an eye on FHA delinquency rates. That's the canary in the coal mine for the whole market.
When it's all said and done, it comes down to this. The story that a lot of people are hearing is that the market is just catching its breath before it starts climbing again. But the data, the actual numbers on inventory, on price cuts, on affordability, it's telling a totally different story. It says something much, much bigger is going on.
You know, understanding this cycle and seeing this data, it's not supposed to cause panic. It's about empowerment. The pattern of boom, mania, and then correction is crystal clear. It has played out over and over again. The data shows stage 4 is here. So the only real question left is, what are you going to do with what you now know?